in a moment no one saw coming. Legendary boxer Mike Tyson was overwhelmed with emotion during a live television interview. It happened right after he received a heartfelt letter from Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso. The powerful exchange revealed a deep, unexpected bond between the strong personalities from completely different worlds. What began as a typical morning show appearance quickly turned into something unforgettable, an emotional moment that left the entire studio completely silent. Mike had been invited to a major American morning show to talk about his new memoir and a Netflix documentary. He seemed calm, maybe a bit tired, but still sharp and composed. The cameras started rolling. The host smiled and began with casual questions. Then she suddenly paused and told him they had something special for him. "We have something today you didn't expect," she said as she reached beneath her seat. She held out a cream-colored envelope with gold writing. It had arrived the night before from West Africa. It was from President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. The letter, she explained, was addressed specifically to Mike Tyson. It was private, but the president had agreed that they could read it live if Mike allowed it. Mike looked confused but intrigued. He hesitated, then nodded slowly and said, "Go ahead." What happened next wasn't just surprising, it touched something deep inside him. The letter didn't speak to the champion or the public figure. It reached the man behind the image. The fighter's mask fell away, and for the first time, the world saw the wounded boy hidden beneath the gloves. The host opened the letter and began reading aloud, slowly and carefully. "Dear Mr. Tyson, my name is Ibrahim Traoré, President of the Transition of Burkina Faso. I do not write this to you as a politician. I write this as a boy who once had nothing and saw you fight on a flickering TV in a crowded room." Mike's entire demeanor shifted, his expression tightened, and his breathing changed. "You were not just a boxer, you were proof that pain could be turned into power, that a boy from nowhere could stand before giants and make them fall." Mike leaned forward, eyes wide, absorbing every word. The letter continued, "When my country was hurting, I remembered your eyes in the ring, not your fists, your eyes, the pain, the fire, the refusal to be broken. And now, I try to lead my people with that same fire." The room had gone completely still. "Thank you, Mike Tyson, for teaching me to rise. Not as a fighter, but as a man." Mike turned his head away from the camera. His voice cracked. "Stop. Just stop for a second," he whispered. Tears were already forming. He tried to smile, but it was clear something inside him had shattered. The host gently set the letter on the table in front of him. Mike's hands trembled. There had never been a silence like this in the studio. It was so still. The soft buzzing of the studio lights could be heard. Mike looked down and tried to hold back tears, but he couldn't. They came first slowly, then heavily. He saw me," Mike whispered. "Not the knockouts, not the fame, just me." He wiped his face, but the tears kept falling. "I was 14, homeless, angry. I wanted to die back then. Nobody knew. Nobody cared." There was an audible gasp from the audience. "I fought cause it was the only way anyone looked at me," he said quietly. Then he looked straight into the camera. "But to know that halfway across the world, someone watched me and became something, a president." He broke down completely. There was no camera cut, no commercial break. No one moved. The man once known as the most feared fighter in the ring had become the most vulnerable person in the room, and in that moment, the story wasn't about boxing anymore. It was about being seen, about being known. The boy who once felt invisible had unknowingly helped another boy across the world rise to power. Out of pain came purpose, from punches came peace, and from one letter came a kind of healing no one expected. When the show finally cut to commercial, Mike stayed seated, silently wiping his eyes. The host leaned over and asked gently if he wanted to continue. Mike nodded. Double quotes, "Yes. The world needs to hear this." When they returned from the break, everything had changed. There was no script now, no promotional talk, just truth. "Ibrahim Traoré," Mike began, his voice full of emotion. "I never met you, but I feel like I know you." He held the letter tightly against his chest like it meant everything. Mike Tyson spoke with a deep emotion most had never seen from him. I wasn't supposed to survive my youth, he admitted. I was a thief, a fighter. I was locked up. Before I ever knew love, the audience leaned in quiet. Then he added, but this man, this president, he saw strength in my suffering. He paused for a long breath. Nobody talks about the pain, the hunger, the nights you pray not to wake up. But this letter, it told me I wasn't alone. The cheerful, bright studio had turned into a space for reflection. What started as a typical TV segment had now become something deeply personal. One man's tears had carried another man's message, and now the world was watching and listening. That same evening, thousands of miles away, President Ibrahim Traoré sat alone in his small office in Ouagadougou. The lights were dim, a ceiling fan buzzed overhead, and his security team waited outside to give him privacy. On a small screen, he watched the interview live. When Mike broke into tears, the president looked down quietly and wiped his own eyes. He felt it, he whispered in French. He really felt it. Behind him, the office walls were covered, and photos not of politicians or dignitaries, but of children sitting in dusty schoolrooms. Local farmers, nurses, soldiers, his people. And among those photos was one small frame picture, a young Mike Tyson, shirtless, fists up, eyes filled with fire. It wasn't just about boxing. To the president, it was about spirit, about resilience. Just then, his assistant entered with an update. The UN just reached out. They saw the interview. They want to revisit the education reforms discussion. Ibrahim looked at him and replied, let them wait. Tonight, the world doesn't need politics. He turned his eyes back to the screen. Tonight, it needs truth. Meanwhile, back in Newark, the video of Tyson's tearful reaction had gone viral. Within hours, it was everywhere: social media, news outlets, school assemblies. Clips of the moment spread like wildfire. Refugee camps in Africa played the footage on small screens. Celebrities shared it. People cried with him. But this emotional story wasn't finished yet. Just after midnight, Mike's phone rang. It was an international number. He hesitated for a second, then answered. Hello? A calm voice responded. Mr. Tyson, this is Ibrahim Traoré. There was silence on both ends. Mike's voice tightened. You're the guy from the letter? Yes, the president replied. And you're the man who taught me how to survive when I was just a boy with no shoes. They didn't speak like public figures or global icons. They spoke like survivors. Thank you, Mike whispered. No, Traoré said gently. Thank you. You gave me the courage to stand up when the world told me to kneel. Then came a question that would change everything. Mike, would you come to Burkina Faso? Tyson was stunned. What for? He asked. The president replied, not for a fight, for hope. In that single moment, two men born on different continents, scarred by different kinds of battles, had found a bridge between them through shared pain, and something extraordinary had just begun. That night, Mike couldn't sleep. After talking to President Traoré, he sat alone with a letter in his hand, reading it again and again. It wasn't poetic or fancy. It was raw and honest. One line kept echoing in his mind. When I was 13, I fought not with gloves, but with hunger. That wasn't just the president's life, that had been Mike's life, too. He remembered stealing food from corner stores in Brooklyn, fighting anyone who crossed him, and being locked up in juvenile detention. He had been invisible to the world until one man, one trainer, saw something in him, just like Ibrahim, who had no one until he found belief in himself. The next morning, Mike's team entered his dressing room, ready to go over the day's packed schedule: brand meetings, promotional shoots, and interviews. But Mike looked at the papers and tore them in half. I'm flying to Burkina Faso, he announced. His team was stunned. Are you sure? They asked. Tyson didn't hesitate. His voice was calm but fierce. It's not about boxing anymore. It's about the kid I was and the boy he still is. 2 days later, Mike Tyson arrived in Ouagadougou. There were no red carpets, no paparazzi, just sunlight, heat, and faces full of awe. Children ran barefoot alongside the car, shouting, Mike Tyson, Mike Tyson. He waved, but kept his heart focused. He wasn't there to be a star. He came to reconnect with a piece of himself. President Traoré greeted him at the modest government building. There were no cameras, no grand gestures, just a sincere handshake that lingered a few seconds longer than expected. They didn't talk about politics. They talked about pain. Traoré took Mike Tyson to visit a rural school. The walls were cracked. The paint was faded, but the sound of children laughing filled the air. As they entered one of the classrooms, Mike noticed a young boy with a swollen eye. He asked softly, "You fight?" The boy nodded shyly. Mike sat down next to him on the floor and said quietly, "Me too. But you know what the strongest punch is? It's the one you don't throw." Then, he gently handed the boy his championship ring, just to hold for a moment. The boy's small hands trembled as he touched it. Right then, President Traoré knelt beside them and added in a soft but steady voice, "In this country, you are not your scars, you are your spirit." The boy began to cry, and so did Mike. Later that night, the president and the boxer sat on a rooftop under the stars. Looking over the glowing lights of quiet Burkina Faso, Traoré handed Mike a box. Inside it were dozens of letters written by children from all across the country. He explained that the children had heard about the letter he sent to Mike, and now they had written to him as well. Mike opened one. It read, "Dear Mike Tyson, you are a lion who made it through fire. Please don't forget us." Another one said, "My papa died fighting to protect our village, but now I believe I can be strong like you." Tears started falling down Mike's cheeks. He held the letters close like they were made of gold. "These are worth more than belts," he said quietly. "More than anything I ever won." President Traoré nodded slowly. "And now you see, brother, pain connects us more than fame ever could." There was no sound in the air, only the pages of those letters rustling in the gentle wind. And in that silent moment, a bond was formed, one not made by power or politics, but by the broken boys who had survived their own wars. As Mike turned through the last few letters, one stood out. It was written on a torn piece of notebook paper. It read, "Dear Mr. Tyson, my name is Maddie. I am 11 years old. My father was a soldier. He said your fights gave him courage. He died last year. Now I try to be brave. I heard you cry. That means even lions cry, so maybe I can cry too." Mike's hand shook slightly as he read it. He remembered what it felt like to be 11, watching his mother slowly fade away, feeling like the world had no place for boys like him. He whispered under his breath, as if speaking to himself, "Even lions cry." President Traoré looked at him, eyes full of quiet understanding. He gently asked, "That boy, Maddie, lives nearby. Would you like to meet him?" Mike didn't speak. He just nodded. The next morning, they set out early, driving for 2 hours down dusty roads. They passed goats, women balancing water buckets on their heads, and children playing football with balls made of plastic bags. When they arrived, a barefoot boy ran out of a small house. His face was glowing, not with excitement about meeting a famous boxer, but with awe. He was meeting someone he felt truly understood him. Maddie stood still, clutching a worn photo of his father in a military uniform. The photo looked like it had been held too many nights under a pillow. Mike knelt down to meet him at eye level. "You're braver than I ever was, little man," he said gently. Maddie blinked as tears filled his eyes. "But I cry." Mike gave him a soft smile. "So do I." Without another word, Maddie stepped forward and hugged him tight. It wasn't a hug for a photo. It wasn't staged. It was the kind of hug you give when you're afraid someone might leave again. Mike wrapped his arms around him and held on. Then the tears came deep, heavy sobs that shook his entire body. There were no cameras around. The crew stayed respectful. In the background, President Traoré stood nearby, one hand over his chest, eyes glistening. It wasn't just a hug. It was one soul reaching out to another. Pain met pain. Loss met loss. And in between, healing quietly began. As they sat under the shade of a mango tree, Maddie looked up and asked in a small voice, "Will you leave too?" Mike met his eyes and said firmly, "I'll be back, I promise." And this time, he truly meant it. 2 days later, Mike returned to America. A major television interview had already been scheduled. What started as a simple talk show segment about boxing quickly turned into something much deeper. The host smiled and joked, "You've been off the grid, Mike. Africa. What were you doing starting a new fight club?" Mike laughed for a second. Then his expression changed. "Actually," he said, "I was being healed by an 11-year-old. Boyd." The room fell completely silent. He slowly pulled out Maddie's letter, holding it gently. He read aloud, "Even lions cry." His voice cracked mid-sentence. And then, on live TV, the man once known as the most feared boxer in history cried. The entire studio froze. No one spoke. The host's smile faded into quiet respect. Mike looked up and said with full honesty, "I met kids who've lost everything, and yet they have more heart than than most champions I've ever seen." Then he turned toward the camera, his eyes heavy with emotion. "Ibrahim Traoré, thank you. Thank you for reminding me that real strength isn't fists, it's love." There wasn't a dry eye in the room, and across the world, people watching. In their homes felt the weight of that moment. Some cried, some smiled, but everyone watching felt something they hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The very next morning, Mike's phone rang. It was early, and he didn't recognize the number, but something in him said to pick up. Mike Tyson. A calm voice asked, "Yes, who's this?" Mike replied, "This is Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso." Mike paused, surprised. Then Traoré continued, "I saw what you did for Maddie. You didn't just honor his father. You healed something in him and in you." Mike stayed silent for a few seconds, deeply moved by the sincerity in the president's voice. "I want to invite you back," Traoré said, "but this time, not just for one boy. Come back for a nation. I want you to speak to the youth. Tell them your story. Show them what it means to rise from nothing." Mike took a deep breath. His voice trembled slightly as he replied, "You don't know what that means to me, brother." "I do," said Traoré softly. "They made plans, right?" Then on the phone, within 48 hours, Mike was flying back to Africa. But this time, it wasn't about boxing. It wasn't about cameras or stories. This was about redemption, about using his past, his scars, as a message of strength. And for the first time in decades, Mike Tyson wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for hope. At the school in Ouagadougou, the grounds were packed. Hundreds of students sat on the dusty ground, some in faded uniforms, others holding worn notebooks or old photos of Mike Tyson from yellowed newspapers. Mike arrived quietly. There were no flashing lights, no big stage, no security team, just him, a chair, and a translator standing nearby. He began speaking slowly, his words heavy with meaning. "I used to think I was just a weapon," he said. "I didn't know I had a heart until I listened to a child." He told them about Maddie, about losing his mother, about prison, about how he fought in the ring because he didn't know how to fight the pain inside him. All across the crowd, boys who once believed real men never cry now sat with tears forming in their eyes. Then Mike stepped off the platform and walked into the sea of children. He pointed at one boy directly. "You," he said, "you think no one sees you, but I do. You're strong, even when you feel broken." That boy started crying, and then another did, then another. President Traoré stood quietly at the back of the crowd, gently wiping a tear from his own face. This wasn't just a speech. It was something more, a quiet revolution of the heart. That night, after everything had settled, Mike sat beside President Traoré under a blanket of stars. There were no microphones, no reporters, just two men sitting together, both carrying heavy pasts but full hearts. After a long pause, Mike asked softly, "Why did you write the letter, Mr. President?" Traoré looked up at the stars and smiled gently. "Because I saw the boy behind, the fighter," he said, "and I believed the world still needed him." Mike didn't say anything in response. He couldn't. His throat tightened, and emotion filled his chest. Then Trey looked at Mike with a soft yet powerful expression and said, "You remind my people that strength isn't about fists. It's about rising again and again after life knocks you down." Mike slowly nodded and replied, "That's all I ever tried to do." The two men shook hands, not like guests at a formal event, but like brothers, like two survivors who had lived very different lives, yet shared the same pain. The following morning, photos from Mike's visit to the school began to spread across social media. But this time, it wasn't about celebrity fame. It was something much deeper. The images showed Mike hugging children, kneeling beside them, telling them they mattered. In clip after clip, he repeated the same words: "Your scars aren't shameful. They're proof you survived." And so, Mike Tyson left Burkina Faso not just as a famous boxer, but as someone changed forever, as someone who had become a healer. At the same time, the world began to look at President Ibrahim Traoré different, not just as a political leader, but as a man who could truly hear people's hearts. Back in New York, Mike returned to the same TV studio where this journey had first begun. The host invited him back for a follow-up interview. Everyone expected something light, maybe a few smiles, some positive remarks, and polite stories. What they got instead was silence. As the lights dimmed in the studio, Mike appeared older, quieter, his hands trembling ever so slightly. The host leaned in and asked gently, "Mike, what changed you the most in Burkina Faso?" Mike looked directly at the camera and whispered, "A child and a president." Then, from his coat pocket, he pulled out a folded drawing. It was for Maddie, the little boy from the village. The drawing showed Mike holding Maddie's hand, with President Traoré standing behind them both, smiling. The studio went still. Mike tried to speak, but his voice caught. Finally, he managed to say, he doesn't want to fight anymore. He just wants to grow. The audience sat breathless. The host, known for always having the right words, couldn't say anything. Mike's voice broke again. "That boy gave me peace. And Traoré, he gave me purpose." One tear slid down his cheek. In that moment, people didn't see a fighter or a legend. They saw a man finally healing. After the interview, Mike sat alone in his dressing room, quiet and thoughtful. A staff member walked in holding a plain brown envelope. "It just arrived," she said. "International mail." Mike took the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside was another handwritten letter from President Ibrahim Traoré. The handwriting was familiar, but the words touched even deeper. "My brother Mike," it read, "they call me a president, but I am just a man who dreams of healing, dreams of peace. Your visit reminded us all that pain is not the end, it's a beginning if we dare to feel it, not fight it. Burkina Faso thanks you. I thank you." And the boy now sleeps peacefully. Mike stared at the paper for a long moment. Then, for the first time in years, he whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for every broken child in the world, and for every leader who still led with a heart. He pressed the letter against his chest. "I was never the baddest man on the planet," he whispered to himself. "I was just a boy waiting to be heard, and finally someone had listened. 1 week. That's all it took to turn pain into purpose." Back in Harlem, Mike stood on a balcony, watching a small group of kids sparring in an alley below. He wasn't their coach. He wasn't shouting instructions. He was just present. One boy tripped and fell hard on the concrete. Mike didn't laugh. He didn't shout. He walked down calmly, lifted the boy up, and said gently, "Every fall teaches you how to rise." Just then, his phone buzzed. It was a photo from Burkina Faso. There stood Maddie, smiling, beaming with pride in front of a brand new boxing gym. A bold sign above the door read, "Tyson Hope Center, sponsored by the government of Burkina Faso. Signed personally by President Ibrahim Traoré." Mike looked at the photo and closed his eyes. The world had once called him a monster, but now a child across the ocean saw him as a mentor, and that was enough. The end. But your tears matter. If this story moved you even a little, please like this video to show love. Subscribe for more true stories that heal, and comment below what moment touched your heart the most. Let's fill this space with love, strength, and second chances, because even the toughest fighters need someone to believe in them. Until the next story, stay human, stay kind.